Hello. I am very excited to welcome you all to the launch of the preview of the carbon neutral certification tool. Now, this tool is going to be for data centers, warehouses, and cold stores. My name is Carissa, and I am going to be your moderator for this morning. But I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay respects to their elders, past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of today. All right, we have a nicely packed session for all of you. Our Executive Director, Carlos, will take us through the context and background of the tool. And afterwards, my colleagues Mayank and Loch will take us down to the nitty-gritty. They'll walk us through the technical fundamentals of the tool and all those important details. And now I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions. So if you do, go ahead and pop them over in the chat anytime, and we'll get to those questions in our Q&A at the end. Okay, sound good? Over to you, Carlos.
Great, thanks, Carissa. Thanks for having me. And we're not going to use slides for this part. We're going to have slides for what's coming a bit later on. But I wanted to welcome you all and thank you for being here for this. What is basically a preview of the NABERS pathway for carbon neutral in 3 sectors that NABERS hasn't been before with this tool, which is data centers, infrastructure, warehouses, and cold stores. So it's great to see a lot of you. Some of you are, participants in those markets. Some of you are assessors or consultants that work with organizations in those sectors. And I'd like to, before we go too deep, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I am personally on the land of the Camarago people of the Eora Nation here in the area around North Sydney. And today we're giving you a preview of these 3 sectors. Again, it's warehouses, cold stores, data centers, and our pathway to carbon neutral certification within NABERS. Now, Mayank and Lodge, 2 of my colleagues, are going to be, guiding you through some of this technical detail on how this looks like in practice. But before that, I wanted to kind of, I guess, take a step back and talk about some of the reasons why we've been working in this space. And one thing that I wanted to start with is I wanted to have a reflection of the role of carbon offsets in sustainability, because it is this often a tension between a lot of people who work in sustainability and the use of carbon offsets and what's the right ways to use them. And so there is a lot of tension. It's not new. This has been going on for decades and it continues to go on. It's probably going to be there for the next decade or 2 as well. And a lot of these concerns often come from the fact that people are concerned that buying offsets could actually delay other really important climate action that organizations need to take on the ground at the root of the issue. So I wanted to talk about that. And I wanted to be really clear because the science in this space is actually really clear. We do need know what buildings and organizations that operate inside of buildings need to do to tackle climate change. We need new buildings to be built with really low upfront carbon. So that's like the emissions from materials like cement and steel and glass and aluminum as low as possible. And on that front with the lowest amount of highly polluting materials as we can. And also, trying to procure materials that are lower in carbon. And once buildings are operational, we need them to be as efficient as they can. And we need them to have no on-site fossil fuels. And there's literally lots and lots of reports in Australia and overseas that basically say we need most buildings around the world to do this. And offsets are not a replacement for them, for that action. I think that's important to always begin these sessions acknowledging that. But all that said, I am a believer that high quality carbon offsets do have a really important role to play in sustainability. And part of the reason is that it doesn't matter how we try to decarbonize and take this action at the root. We also know that buildings in Australia will need millions of individual upgrades, some of them really major, to actually get and tackle these emissions at the root. So we have to work as hard as we can on that. But we also know that that volume of action can happen overnight. It's the kind of things that will take a decade or 2 to be able to get there. So there is a gap that we can't get there by this weekend because the action is in such a scale that is impossible to do, in overnight. And even if you could take action overnight, you can get rid of all the gas from all the buildings in your portfolio today. We still have to deal with the fact that some of the other things that a building relies on, like the electricity grid or the potable water network, those networks are not decarbonized, and they're not going to be decarbonized for quite a few years. And so, even in the time being, even if you take all the action you can domestically and you have this great, really efficient all electric building, it still has emissions because the electricity that is using is actually not carbon neutral just yet. And so, from that perspective, and is there is a gap. A lot of organizations want to do as much as they can for climate change. They are taking this action to reduce their emissions as much as possible, but they also want to purchase offsets for the emissions that they're not able to neutralize just yet. And I think there's a space for really high quality, credible claims on that space. And I think carbon neutral really is all about that. And I think there's a different perspective as well that is good to keep in mind. A lot of us who work in the building space are very used to energy efficiency, which happens to be one action, one set of climate actions that where you invest a dollar and you actually get money back, and often you get more money than what you invested. That's one of the beauties of energy efficiency. But there's lots of other areas in climate change where it's not like that. And one of those sectors, for example, is nature-based solutions to climate change, like reforestation and reducing land degradation. We need as much investment as we can into those sectors. And carbon offsets have proven to be a mechanism to bring a lot of investment to high quality projects in that space that are making a meaningful difference. And so offsets can really accelerate other areas of the fight against climate change, so we can get to net zero emissions as fast as possible and well ahead of 2050. So I wanted to talk about that because the carbon neutral at its very core includes at least offsetting some of the root of your emissions. And I do think there's a really important role for credible carbon offsets in that space. And so do a lot of other people in this space. And if you're interested in that, I strongly recommend there's a report released by the Property Council and the Green Building Council working together last year called Carbon Offsets Last but Not Least, I believe is the name. And it's a great report that makes exactly this case, that is we need to tackle emissions at the root, but also credible offsets can make a really big difference in driving investment to other areas of the climate front. Um, Now, that said, as you know, NABERS has been expanding significantly in the last few years. In the last, 3 or 4 years, was expanded to 4 new sectors. Some of them include warehouses and cold stores, which are the at front and center today. We're also currently expanding to schools. So we're working with public and private schools across Australia, and we're expecting to launch that within the next few weeks. And we're also doing a broader expansion of NABERS to most of the retail sector beyond just shopping centers, which we're also expecting to launch in the next few months. There's been lots of expansion activity. And with that expansion, because we've been reaching organizations in sectors that we couldn't work in before, that we're doing a lot of great work in sustainability, we just didn't really have an avenue to work with them. We do now. And through those conversations, we've had a lot of organizations like the ones you represent being really interested in being able to certify not just under NABERS Energy, but also in seeking a carbon neutral certification, which is the reason we work with our colleagues in the Climate Active Carbon Neutral program in the Commonwealth, and with a lot of you in industry to, test that, refine that, flesh out the detail, and put this together for this release today. And there's a couple of things that I want to cover before I throw over to Mayank and Lodge. I think one of them is, to share some of the reasons. If you're new to a carbon neutral certification for buildings, I thought I'd share a couple of reasons why people in other sectors have used carbon neutral. I don't think there's one reason to use a carbon neutral rating. There's often multiple different reasons. Some people do it because, a carbon neutral certification is something that you can use in global corporate reporting that a lot of companies that are exposed to international investment use platforms like the global real estate sustainability benchmark, for example. You can use it in those settings. Some people use it at a much more local level, like as a way, for example, to demonstrate to your customers, your community, if you rent space to your tenant, to demonstrate to them that you're doing as much as you can to lead on the fight against climate change. And this is one really very concrete way in which you're doing that, which is trying to neutralize all your emissions today. And there's also a range of other ways. Some people do it for leadership, others because they have broader commitments to reach net zero emissions well ahead of 2050. And so again, there's a range of different reasons. We just want to share a couple of them, and maybe we can also explore a few of this later on in this session, because there isn't one way to use this. There's actually a plethora of different ways to tackle that. I think before we go into large imaging, I wanted to expand a little bit on that. With carbon neutral, we didn't just work with the Australian government, though we do work really closely with our colleagues in Canberra, but also we work with many of you. We had a lot of you volunteering some of your time to give us feedback on the process, the certificate, and how we're going to display these indicators in practice, and the materials that we're going to give you to promote these buildings and your achievements in this space. And also we got a lot of this from organizations in these sectors, in data centers and in warehouses and cold stores, also from a lot of assessors and consultants working in this space. So some of you are in this call today, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you for your time and feedback. It just helped us create a product that is going to be more helpful, and there's nothing that can replace real feedback from real participants in this market. Now, that said, maybe the last thing I wanted to mention is that if you work for a company that owns or operates a warehouse or a cold store or data centers, and you're thinking about like, what is the next step? What do I have to do if I want to get a carbon neutral certification? I think the good news is that it's actually really simple. Like, the main thing that you have to do is basically reaching out to a NABERS assessor that is able to do carbon neutral certification. Their role really is taking all the complexity out of your hands. So the certification process, making sure that it's robust, that all the evidence is collected, and is the role that NABERS assessors do. So from a customer perspective, it's actually a relatively simple process. You just engage an assessor and they do a lot of the hard work for you. So you can dive into the nitty gritty. And if you want to, we love customers that want to dive into that with you, with us, but you don't have to. And we do know lots of people and lots of participants in NABERS that actually put a lot of that on the assessor, who are really well trained and equipped to deal with that. And on the other hand, we have a range of assessors today in this call. And I wanted to say that if you already have carbon neutral, if some of you have been conducting certifications in sectors like offices, hotels, and shopping centers, but we've had carbon neutral certification for a few years. So if you have that, and you're also trained to do a data center rating or warehouses or cold stores, then we have good news for you. You don't need to do any further training. You can just conduct carbon neutral ratings in these sectors. And if you don't, if you haven't, maybe you've never done a data center rating before, maybe you haven't done the training for that. If you do, and you do get accreditation in that space, you will be able to conduct carbon neutral ratings as well. Now, maybe the main, in terms of dates, the main thing we wanted to share with you is that we will be able to certify buildings from about mid-April. That's what we're aiming for, which is only a month away, literally a few weeks away. So if you're interested in participating in this, if this is something that you want to do, you can already start working with your assessor on achieving a carbon neutral rating for data centers, warehouses, or cold stores. I'm going to leave it there for now, but I'll be here for the rest of the session. And I would like to hand over back to my colleague, Carissa. And once again, thanks so much to all of you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Carlos. It's good to know offsets are part of our multi-pronged tool against climate change. Yeah, I will now pass you to Mayank and Lodge for the technical details. Take it away.
Thanks, Carissa, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks a lot, Carlos, for providing such insightful details behind the carbon neutral tool. So today, Lodge and I will be taking you through the technical aspects of the carbon neutral tool, which we are expanding into warehouses and cold store, as well as data centers. So moving on, the next slide provides a brief overview, what's NABERS doing about the tool. So as we know, NABERS is a pathway to carbon neutrality, and carbon neutral certifications are offered by Climate Active, which is an Australian government-backed program. So through NABERS, organizations can proceed to the pathway of getting the carbon neutral claims. And in order to do so, there are different processes which they have to follow through. Mainly one is like calculating your emissions. Then also you reduce your emissions wherever it's possible. And once it's calculated, you purchase your offsets, and then you apply for your climate active certification. Now, in order to proceed, you have to have a bare minimum of energy and water emissions. And also you need to have a bare minimum energy criteria in order to proceed with your climate active carbon neutral claims. Now, this slide kind of provides you a brief overview how carbon neutral certifications are achieved. So as I said, the NABERS energy and water ratings are the foundation or the basis of any carbon neutral claim. Once you have that, then you can start working on gathering all the other emissions, which were not the part of the NABERS energy. So there are some emissions which are not included in it, whereas when the carbon neutral claims are made, those emissions needs to be included back. And these emissions are energy, water, wastewater, waste, refrigerants, and some other emissions. Once you have calculated all your emissions which were missed out, you can then proceed by purchasing offsets. And these offsets are used to offset any remaining emissions. And then you can submit your rating. And then after the auditing process, it is certified through the Climate Active. And then in the next slide, I'll give you an overview how we have been offering carbon neutral ratings so far. So until now, NABERS has provided pathway to provide carbon neutral claims for office buildings, hotels, and shopping centers. And today we are launching two new tools, which is data centers, warehouses, and cold stores. So you might see data centers and cold stores are two different icons here, but from NABERS perspective, we count them as one single tool. And at the moment for data centers, we are only offering the carbon neutral claims for infrastructure ratings. Moving on, how we reached here. So this process or this entire pathway was not easy. There were some challenges which we had to go through. And in order to do so, what we did initially, we started gathering the data around these tools. Luckily, data centers and warehouses, we had the historic data and we compiled that one. And then we started doing some technical analysis, for which we conducted a bunch of workshops late last year to get insights from different stakeholders, which comprised of assessors, organizations, sector experts, and different consultants from the industry, to get the feedback from them, like how this tool should be developed, what kind of emission boundaries should be included, what are the activities and what are the boundary issues currently being faced in this sector. So all these challenges were the part of the initial framework study in order to assess and prioritize which sectors we need to proceed. And warehouses and data centers were one of the key candidates for carbon neutral expansion. Also, while we were doing this stakeholder engagement, we also got a feedback like we need to revamp how the carbon neutral guidance is provided across all the sectors, not just the existing one, but also the one we are expanding into. Hence, we started working on making a document named Carbon Neutral Guidance Document, which most of you would be aware because we released it for public consultation last year. And thanks for providing such grateful feedback. We have now completed this document, which was the source of truth to proceed for carbon neutral claims. Once that document is completed, we went on to updating the existing carbon neutral training to accommodate these two new sectors, as well as different areas which were captured in this guidance document. And parallelly, we were also updating the carbon neutral calculator, which is an offline version in a spreadsheet. And also after that, we will be launching the tool, which is mid-April next month. With that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Lodge, to give you an overview about different emissions and other aspects of the tool. Over to you, Lodge. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayank. And thank you, Carlos and Carissa. That was a great introduction. Welcome to everyone on the webinar. I can see a lot of familiar names, but if you are new to a NABERS webinar, welcome to all our friends. In the next few slides, I'll be going through the emission sources with a brief overview. But all of these information, as Mayank's mentioned before, will be in a comprehensive document called the NABERS CN guidance document. Starting off with refrigerant emissions, the most obvious refrigerant leakage for both these sectors are air conditioning equipment, but we've also captured cold storage, refrigerant equipment, and blast freezer refrigerant equipment within the calculator for warehouses and cold store building types. The next slide goes through the energy-related emissions in your carbon account. And it's important to understand that emissions boundary for energy-related emissions is based on the NABERS rating, but you will need to include any excluded items for your carbon neutral rating. What I mean by that is the inner circle there is the perimeter of a NABERS energy ratings, energy emissions. And for an example, gas emissions from a manufacturing facility in a warehouse building will be excluded for a NABERS warehouse energy rating because it's not part of the scope. However, because carbon neutral assesses buildings emissions as the building in its entirety, you will need to include that back in. We have a few more examples to your right on electricity, which follows the same idea, where electricity usage, for example, in a large office space not supported by the warehouse's operation might be excluded for the NABERS warehouse energy rating, but it will need to be included back in to your carbon neutral rating. On the next slide, I've got emissions related to water. So water consumption and wastewater discharge are compulsory inclusions for your Scope 3 carbon account. The most convenient method of obtaining water data is through your water utility bills, and the easiest method of calculating your wastewater and water emissions is to use the default emission factors we have provided in the calculator tool. But if you have your user-defined emissions available and adequate with the evidence requirement we have detailed in the CN guidance document, we highly encourage you to use them because they will be more accurate. Then on the next and last slide, we've got waste-related emissions. Emissions from waste occur from the decomposition of waste in landfills, and we have included more waste streams for warehouses, cold stores, and data centers. We've included the calculation methodologies for medical waste disposal for incinerations, pallet waste for data centers, and we've understood it to be mostly recycled. But if you do have confirmed data saying that pallet wastes are going to landfills, you will be able to capture those waste streams. And lastly, e-waste is understood to be contributing zero emissions. That is just a fact we've found from our assessment and our consultation. And overall, these are the emission sources that I'd like to touch on during this launch webinar. And on the next slide are the documents that underpin our processes, program, and it has all the relevant information that you need to complete a carbon neutral account, a carbon neutral rating. Apologies, with the NABERS. I wanted to highlight that this process is a work of close to 6 to 8 months of consultation and our experience with delivering carbon neutral ratings for close to 5 years now. And we've made it very easy and convenient for building owners to understand what comprises in a carbon neutral rating in our CN guidance document as well. More so for the assessors, we've made it very convenient, clear, and instructional and prescriptive to make sure your building's carbon account is to the standard of a NABERS rating. It's also important for me to highlight that the NABERS carbon neutral guidance document sits on top of Climate Active's building standards and electricity accounting rules, which are the documents you see there in green. That is it from me. I'll hand it back to Mayank to go through the scope of the CN guidance document again, along with the next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Lodge. So as Lodge mentioned, that this technical guidance document is the summation of past experience and also the consultation we had with different stakeholders and assessors. And we came to the conclusion that there are some areas which need more insights and guidance around how these can be addressed while making carbon neutral claim. So this technical guidance document provides more guidance on the areas listed here, which are waste, refrigerant, mixed-use building, water and wastewater emissions. It also provides more requirements or different documentations which you need as an evidence to support these claims. Plus, it provides you a minimum requirement in order to proceed for your carbon neutral ratings for a set particular sector. And also it captures additional content related to the two new sectors which we are adding, which is VAX and DC for infrastructure. This document will have further more iterations in the coming period, close to when we launch more tools in carbon neutral. So this document will be maintained up to date. In the next slide, I'll provide you an overview where this document is currently at the moment. So after getting all the feedback from different stakeholders, we have implemented those feedback back into the document, made some changes, and have been provided back to the governance committee. So it's currently under review. And once it's finalized, we will be reaching out to the stakeholders to provide the update. And we are hoping to publish this document by late March 2024. Now I'll run you through some of the next steps for this for these two tools. In the next steps, I will be capturing what's required from the assessors and also from the organizations. So from the organization's perspective, you can talk to your assessors who are accredited to do carbon neutral ratings and get ready to be prepared in order to proceed with the carbon neutral claims. You can also go through the technical guidance document so that you are aware what kind of data you need to capture. If you are not having such data, how you can start gathering and how to gather all the supporting documents. Similarly, for the assessors, you can have discussions with your customers or client and educate them how they can reach the pathway of carbon neutrality using this technical guidance document, and that will be a great help. Moving on to the next slide. Now, you guys will be having some questions, which will be kind of answered in this webinar itself. So I'll just run you through some of the things which would be quite insightful for you. So most of you would be interested to know when this tool is available for both VAX and DC. So as we previously mentioned, from 15th of April, like mid-April, the tool will be officially available and you can start lodging the ratings. In the meanwhile, you can start preparing once all the training and documentations are available for you. Where is the guidance available to proceed for this sector? So as mentioned, Carbon Neutral Technical Guidance Tool is the source of truth along with the other 3 climate active documents. So you can refer to all those 4 documents in conjunction and start working on your carbon neutral claim. So this document will be coming into effect from March 2024. And also there's one more question, like when the carbon neutral data for these, or where the carbon neutral data for these new sectors can be added. So initially, we were using the carbon neutral tool in an offsite calculator, and we have now updated that calculator to accommodate the new scope of emissions captured during warehouses and cold store, as well as data center. So the new version has been updated, and the revised version will be available to all assessors and organizations by 14th of March. So once you complete your rating, you can upload the document, which is your carbon neutral offset calculator, to the Perform platform, because all these tools will be available in Perform. Now, in the next slides, I'll run through the training and the exam for carbon neutral. So we have provided 2 streams for the assessors to upskill into carbon neutral for warehouses and cold stores and data centers. So stream 1 is for the existing assessors, which on the next slide will provide you an overview. So for the existing assessors, the utmost priority and the mandatory requirement is that you go through this technical guidance document, read through it. The second requirement is that you attend this webinar, and in case you haven't attended the webinar, I would request that you mention this to your colleagues, that they can watch the recording of this webinar and sign it off. You can also watch the carbon offset walkthrough calculator, which makes it easier for you to understand how the new version of the calculator will be used to populate the carbon neutral rating. And all of these 3 things are available in a module on NABERS Learn, which is easily accessible to all the assessors, and it's free of cost, so no added fee. In case you're not able to access, please feel free to reach out at neighbors@environment.nsw.gov.au, and we'll be more than happy to sign you up for this one. Whereas for the new assessors, I'm moving on to the next slide, you obviously need to go through the carbon neutral technical guidance document, and you also need to go through the carbon neutral rating, which has been now amended and updated to accommodate these 2 new sectors, as well as these areas which have been added into the technical guidance document for your learning. And finally, you should also watch the offset calculator walkthrough, which will further educate you how you can populate the data into the carbon offset calculator. With that, I'll close off my slides and open the floor for any further question and answers. Thank you. Handing it over back to you, Carissa.
Thank you, Mayank, and thank you, Loch. That really looked like a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm very excited for the launch. We're now opening the floor for the Q&A, but at this point, I would like to introduce Matt Hoogland. Matt was the indispensable technical consultant that helped build this tool. That means if you have extra hard questions, Matt can help answer them. Okay, let's see. I'd like to start this Q&A with a question to Mayank. So Mayank, you may have mentioned this, but a question on accreditation. Do assessors need to be accredited in the energy tool to be able to conduct the carbon neutral rating? You can there.
Yes, you need to be accredited into the energy tool for a particular sector, whichever you want to do the carbon neutral claim. Let's say if you want to do carbon neutral assessment for warehouses, you need to be accredited in the energy tool for warehouses, and likewise for data centers.
Okay, that's clear. And another question, Mayank or Loch, any one of you? Will the carbon neutral ratings be available for more sectors in the future? And will the guidance document capture all these future sectors?
Yep, so we are in the process of working through more sectors, which are public hospitals and residential aged care. Although they are at the development stage at this point, once they are fully developed and approved, we will be doing a launch webinar similar to what we did today. And there are also some future potential prospects which we are targeting, namely apartment buildings, retirement living, office tenancies, as well as data centers for IT equipment and whole facility. And as we go about the carbon neutral technical guidance document, yes, it will be updated as soon as we launch a new sector to accommodate the insights in the same document. Thank you.
I see a question from Stephen. Hi, Stephen. If we're doing a warehouse rating for part of a site, so for example, 1 building out of 3 sites, can we get a carbon neutral certification as an add-on? Who can answer that? Nick?
Sorry, I'm just trying to read that question.
Okay.
Otherwise, if Lodge and Matt, you want to go proceed, please.
I'll maybe Stephen, if you could come off mute. I just have a clarification there for you. Is this building adjacent to the other 3 buildings, or is it a standalone building with its own address?
It'll be. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one I've got in mind is one that we didn't. We've already done a NABERS energy rating for last year, but we only managed to include part of the site in the rating. It's a single address, but we've only got. It's a site with multiple tenants, but we only managed to get some of the tenants. Well, in fact, some of the tenants are warehouse tenants, and some of them are not warehouse tenants. So only part of the site only some of the tenants qualify as warehouse. But the owner of this site would be keen to get carbon neutral certification.
Yeah,
So
Lodge,
do we have to include all the other tenants in it? That's the question, I guess.
Good question. So for warehouses, if I'm not mistaken, it is a whole building rating.
It's a whole building rating,
Right.
and yes,
And
you'll have to include the tenants if they are not the part of the original warehouse scope. But if they are not qualified as a warehouse facility itself, then it comes to case-by-case understanding how we can proceed on that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'll just add to that, Mike. I think even though the warehouse is a whole facility rating, there is a scope for a part building assessment. And that's probably what this NABERS rating has been conducted for. I think, yeah, peculiar case like that would be case by case, but my initial thoughts would be that a carbon neutral assessment would be possible for that particular site. For that particular one building that you've conducted the NABERS rating for. It should be manageable, but I think, yeah, we address it case by case.
Okay. It might need to include the water for the whole site because it may not be separatable into the separate buildings, for example.
There's allowance in the tool to apportion the water based
is there?
Based on the floor area. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In the carbon neutral tool that we've put together.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Stephen. We have another one from Simone. Simone is asking, what type of carbon credits may be used to achieve the carbon neutral rating? So there's LGCs, ACCUs, IRECs. What type of these?
Yep, I can take that on. So I'm just pulling up the tools and resources page on Climate Active's website, and it will give you the list of, I believe, 6 offset types. ACCUs are included in them that you are allowed to claim your offsets from. And just to clarify, LGCs are not carbon offsets. They are renewable energy certificates. So you can use them even for your, as you have used for your NABERS energy ratings as well, to cancel your electricity related emissions.
Okay, thank you, Lodge. Simone, how is that? Do you have further questions?
No, thank you. That answered my question really well. Thanks, Lodge.
Thank you. And now we have a question from Felix. Does the carbon offset calculator take into account the anticipated rise in prices of the carbon offsets as we approach like 2030, 2050? Lodge, are you able to take that?
I'm just reading the question again, sorry. Does the carbon offset calculator take into account the anticipated rise in price? What do you mean by that, Felix?
I can answer that if you like. I think Felix is alluding to the projected increase in carbon offsets, the cost of carbon offsets in the next 20 years or so. He's absolutely right. But no, the carbon offset calculator doesn't take that into account. The offset calculator calculates the emissions for the site, and tells you how many carbon offsets you need to purchase to balance that out. But it doesn't forecast the cost of that at all.
If I could add to that, to obtain those units, you can use the carbon offset calculator anytime, and the quantity you obtain from that, you'd have to do your due diligence to find out the total cost and price.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for that question, Felix. And thank you everyone for your questions. Maybe before we wrap this up, last words of wisdom from Mayank, Matt, and Loch. If people can take away one thing from the session, what would it be? Let's start with Mayank.
I would say you still have time till 15th of April, so you can start upskilling, read the document, and get ready for carbon neutral readings.
Nice. Loch?
We've made it very easy for assessors. This is not too much information outside of a carbon neutral rating that you would have done for offices or shopping centers or hotels. As the expansion is a program, and this is a section or an individual project, but there have been other projects such as automating the CN carbon neutral offset tool to make it more productive and efficient in your own process. So please don't think of the expansion as more work. It really isn't in our views, and we've taken a lot of effort, resources to make sure it's easier for both the both the communication piece between assessors to building owners, but also more importantly, the actual work that assessors would have to do on the data entry side.
Great, easy. And lastly, Matt?
Oh, well, Loch stole my point, so I would just second that. We've done all the hard work. So the calculator makes it really easy to calculate the emissions of the site and tell you how many offsets you need to purchase. So it's not too much further work after you've done the NABERS rating to extend that into a carbon neutral assessment.
All right, thank you. If anyone else has more questions, you can reach out to us. We are an email away.
Carissa,
Yes.
sorry to jump in. We have one question from Atif. I can take that one. So yeah, you need a minimum energy requirement of 4 stars in case of warehouses, yes. And if in case 4-star commitment agreement is made, then also you can proceed with the carbon neutral claims. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Back to you, Carissa. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah. Thank you, Mayank, and thank you, Atif, for that last question. With that said, thanks everyone for joining. The launch is on April 15, and our next webinar is on March 20. That's a webinar on current funding opportunities available for all of you. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.